In order to study the gyre and sulci, first we have to divide the entire half of the cerebral hemisphere into 5 lobes. So first lobe, frontal, parietal, this will be the occipital, this will be the temporal, and buried within the ramus of the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus will be the insula. So how we delineate these lobes? So in order to delineate these lobes, we need to have 2 imaginary lines and 3 important sulci and 1 notch. So first the 3 important sulci are, first one will be the central sulcus, as you see here. So this is the central sulcus, this is the central sulcus. So how you identify this as the central sulcus? There are certain characteristics. It will start on the medial surface of the cerebrum, then it cuts the superomedial border 1 centimeter behind the midpoint between frontal and occipital poles, then it descends downwards and forwards and ends just above the posterior ramus of lateral sulcus, but it will not touch the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. So this is how you identify the central sulcus. Then lateral sulcus, as you see here. So this is the olfactory bulb and this is the olfactory tract, and these two are the olfactory striae, and this is the anterior perforated substance. Just lateral to the anterior perforated substance starts the stem of the lateral sulcus, that is called sylvian sulcus. As you see here, so at the sylvian point it is having an ascending ramus, an anterior horizontal ramus and a posterior ramus. So this posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus is very important for us. Then this is the occipital pole, this is the inferolateral border. If you trace this occipital pole forward around 3 centimeters, there will be a notch called preoccipital notch. After that, as you see here, this is the calcarine sulcus and this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, which begins from the calcarine sulcus and it cuts the superomedial border. As you see, this is the parieto-occipital sulcus and it cuts the superomedial border here. So now as you see, we have the central sulcus, then we have the lateral sulcus, posterior ramus, and we have the parieto-occipital sulcus and preoccipital notch. Now the 2 imaginary lines. The imaginary line joining the preoccipital notch with the parieto-occipital sulcus is the first imaginary line. The second imaginary line is the posterior extension of the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. So this extension. So now here we have 1 line and here we have 1 line. So with these lines, the part of the cerebral hemisphere which is behind the first imaginary line is the occipital lobe. On the part of the cerebral hemisphere which is below the stem of posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus and the second imaginary line, and in front of the first imaginary line lower part is the temporal lobe, and the part of the cerebral hemisphere which is anterior to the central sulcus is the frontal lobe, and which is posterior to the central sulcus and anterior to the upper part of the first imaginary line and above the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus is the parietal lobe. So frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe and temporal lobe, and within this you can see the insula. I will show you the insula. You can see this is the insula or island of Riehl, which I will explain in another video. So total 5 lobes.